All right, today we're going to talk about how it is an ideal time for CHROs and Chief People Officers to get board ready. And I'm Cindy Liu, the founder of CHRO Partners. We run HR mastermind groups for Chief HR Officers and Chief People Officers. Let's jump into the research and why I think it's an ideal time for CHROs to get on boards, to get board ready. Not too long ago, I actually posted a video on how since 2017, there has been a 300% increase in chief HR officers or senior HR leaders on boards. And this is a significant jump. So basically, let's say in 2017, there was something like, I think 15 to 20 per year getting added to boards. Now it's upwards of 70, 75. Many of you may recall the SEC human capital disclosure requirements that were really introduced, really made the press, I would say, before COVID. And then I feel like things got kind of put to the wayside. But in reality, it's actually been something that has been out there in the investment community for quite some time. In fact, there is an organization called Human Capital Management Coalition, which is made up of large global funds that have, and this is probably old data, over $6.6 trillion in assets. And these have basically come together as a coalition to say, hey, look, we need better visibility into the human capital part of the business in order to make good investment decisions. I'm taking snippets of a PowerPoint that they have. And if you ping me, I can share this PowerPoint with you, and some of the links are below. But they basically are saying, hey, human capital fundamentally is an asset, even though on the balance sheet it is not shown as such. But as business has moved into the modern era, that human capital really is our most valuable asset. And having been in human capital intensive businesses for most of my career, this has always been the case. Anyways, they give some history as to how this all came about. As you can see, this has really been going on with this coalition for a long time. So back in 2013. And I think during COVID, things got a little quiet, but there has been some recent activity. In fact, over the summer, there has been a lot of activity at the SEC with panels, and I think they've only had one of 4 of these panels to discuss human capital requirements and sort of get an update on how companies have responded to these human capital disclosures. And I'll be getting into that in more detail in another video, but on this one, we're going to stay focused on why it's a good time for chief HR officers to get on boards. So in more recent news, there's an article from EY on 6 key SEC priorities, and I've gone through and just highlighted the ones that really relate to human capital. So they talk about the fact that Gensler has spoken extensively on investor interest in human capital disclosures, and they indicated that this rule, it will propose a rule in 2022 focused on enhancing these disclosures. So right now, I'll get into this later, it's a lot more qualitative measurements versus quantitative measurements. There's also a proposed rule on corporate board diversity. So that is really, really good news. There's consideration and input from reopening the pay versus performance rule. So that is a big deal in our world right now. And also rule on compensation that incentivizes risky behavior in financial institutions. So that's just focused on the financial sector, however, obviously affects human capital leaders. And then lastly, of course, the ESG, the S in ESG is primarily all focused on human capital related issues. So this was a PwC report that it's a little bit older, but obviously they've got some good measurements and objective measurements that they put out there. And then they reported back on kind of what they've seen filers disclose. And their information seems a little bit rosier than the other information that I've seen on some of the more recent SEC panels. But they're saying that 89% include both qualitative and quantitative metrics. 75% include disclosures related to COVID-19, of course, and 66% are disclosing D&I information. The other trends that they see in the 10K filing versus just a footnote is information on employee demographics, employee life cycle, safety, total rewards, labor relations, and employee feedback. Now, I recently listened to a podcast about human capital disclosures from the conference board, and I believe this was September of 2021, but sort of the first time that companies were disclosing, and they had some consultants on discussing the type of disclosures, and their analysis was that probably only 50% would disclose information, and that more than 50% were actually silent on one of 8 different measures that they identified for human capital disclosures. So they had identified things like board diversity, workforce diversity, talent acquisition and deployment, workforce capability and development, health and safety, comp benefits, executive comp, culture engagement, and workforce experience. And so what they were saying is that on each one of these topics, only 1 and 2 or half of them were making comments on these topics. And the top ones that they were most likely to disclose, in addition to COVID, were actually talent acquisition and deployment, which sort of makes sense because it's an easy one to measure, right? It's easy to measure the metrics related to talent acquisition and deployment, and it's an immediate impact item. And then compensation and benefits. The lowest categories that were disclosed had to do with board diversity and effectiveness and workforce capability development, which makes sense, right? Because that's ROI on developing a workforce sometimes can have quite a lag. And as I said, I'm going to be going through and putting a video together to summarize what's the latest in these SEC disclosures on human capital. All right, another report I found, which was more recent, February 2022, which had to do more with corporate board survey results from an executive search firm called JWC Partners, and basically measuring trends and insights. Their survey basically showed that directors are spending a lot more time on talent management than in recent years. And, what was really is that these directors see the retention of executive talent as the top HR priority and report a variety of actions taken to increase general employee retention with whether it's flexible / remote work as the most common tactic, but also obviously other areas that they've really taken into account is, extra bonuses, mental health benefits, extra PTO, childcare, and then really the key HR / talent priorities and discussion points on a scale of 1 to 7, 7 being the most important. Obviously, retention of executive talent, compensation, employee morale, retention of non-executive talent, remote work policies, employee vaccination requirements, multi-generational workforce. So the board is really digging deeper into these human capital topics. So having a CHRO on the board certainly would be beneficial. All right, so that addresses a lot more of the public company side of things, but I think that there are board opportunities well beyond just the public sector. In fact, this is a report by executiveadvisor.com, and they show where some of the private equity board seats, how they're distributed. So not just public companies, but also, private equity firms, 26%, hedge funds, 26%, mutual funds, 16%, REITs, 11%, and then, of course, public companies, 21%. So there's board seats well beyond just the large public companies. It went on to share that in their database, they've got over 3,300 public companies, over 4,100 private equity firms with over 89,000 portfolio companies listed in their database. And then in addition to that, 4,000 hedge funds, 2,000 mutual funds, and 1,000 real estate investment trusts. So there is definitely opportunities to sit on these boards. They talked about how there's roughly 350 private equity firms owning over 7,800 portfolio companies that are actually large enough to generate board seats that would compensate in the 120K range, and that there's more than 20,000 board seat openings per year that meet or exceed that amount in board compensation. And because these companies really have a responsibility to their investors for good board governance, just like a public company, the best practice is to make sure that they're employing board members to help them really meet their investment goals. And so it sounds like there's a best practice towards identifying a board early, but also I thought this was really interesting that a lot of the capabilities of these directors now are really being are trending towards more functional experts, and but obviously still reserving one or more board seats for CEO types or general management types. So given everything that's going on in human capital right now, I can't imagine boards are not thinking that a CHRO would be a great addition to their board. In fact, Coco Brown, founder and CEO of Athena Alliance, wrote an article for NASDAQ titled, "Could the Chief HR Officer be the new IT role for the boardroom?" She showed that within the S&P 1500, that board members with HR experience hit nearly 20% in January of 2022, and that's up from 11% 2 years prior. And how talent management is really among the top 3 coveted experience areas in the boardroom. Okay, so how can you get board ready? Well, I think that there's plenty of organizations to get involved with, like Coco Brown's Athena, like Women on Boards 50/50, or I think it's 50/50 women on boards, and NACD, so lots of educational forums, places to network. Also, I'm going to be posting our CHRO board education series. So these are videos where we've interviewed with our members, CHROs, as well as other board members, about what it takes to get on boards, how to prepare. You can join a CHRO Partners HR Mastermind group for live interaction when we have these speakers. We're going to have a pretty big focus on bringing on board level speakers into our groups, and not only asking questions and getting the education, but also making those connections. And then, obviously work on your first degree network, people that you've worked with that are now on boards, people who are in the C-suite, CEOs of organizations, and also build new networks through groups like Board Prospects. So Board Prospects is a group that I just joined, and actually our mastermind members at certain levels will get access as well. You have to qualify to join, but they have basically a database of candidates who are board qualified, and I talked to the founder, and it sounds like there's definitely more interest in CHROs, there's more interest in diversity, and they have posted different board openings, but also there's just great networking that goes along there. Okay, so if you'd like to get access to our board education series, some of the information is free and some of it's for members only. But if you'll go to our website, go to chropartners.com/boardpath, chropartners.com board path, enter your information, and you'll get access to some of these videos. So, for example, we have an interview with Rich Flourish. He was a retired CHRO of McDonald's talking about succession planning. This is a members-only segment, but Joanne Caruso, Chief Legal Officer at Jacobs, talking about ESG. We have this one's a public one, discussion around leadership agility with board members. Karen May, who's on the board of ACE, Alcon, and she was the former CHRO of Mondelez. So that was super interesting to hear her perspective as a CHRO. And Catherine Haley, board member at Concentrix First Midwest Bank Corp, and she's the former CEO of Aon Consulting of Americas. This one is a free resource, how to get on boards. We sent Lisa Kaglovitz, she was the prior CHRO of GameStop, to at the time, it was Women on Boards 2020 workshop on how to get on boards. And so she does a nice summary for us on how to do that. More recently, we interviewed Jill Smart, who is the previous CHRO of Accenture and sits on a lot of boards and has sat on lots of boards, as well as Wayne Sales, who has sat on 13 different boards, and he was the former chairman and CEO of SuperValue. So this one talks about the growing need for CHROs and CPOs on boards, and what you can do to get ready. We have some members-only videos. So this is Dan Sessa, and Dan came to us and gave us some real nice details around what it's like to be in the boardroom. He's a CHRO at Lennox International. This is another members-only segment, but Tracy Joy, prior CFO of Toyota, and she talks a lot about how to get on boards and just her just such sage advice around getting on boards. Then we have one that's members-only, Margot Carter. She actually walks us through her board readiness boot camp, so it's quite interactive. All right, so that's just a few. If you will once again go to chropartners.com/boardpath, and I'll put that in the chat below or the comments below. Go ahead and sign up. We'll send you an email with the links, free links, as well as links that are members-only links. All right. Let me know what your thoughts are on CHROs on boards. And then next time, we're going to do a deep dive into the most recent activity at the SCC. They've got a series of panels, so I'll be doing those hopefully as they come up. But a lot of information to plow through, and I'll be walking you through that. Okay, so once again, grab your free education series, and I'll look forward to hearing if you think these videos are valuable. Thanks.